Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we dig into hot topics. My guest today integrates her past clinical experience with data from psychological research. Sound intriguing? Dr. Karin Anderson Abrell is a psychologist and author who's here to help us with sticky situations that come up in all of our relationships. She's here for the case file I call Relationship Principles. Dr. Karin, it seems that you believe most of how we should treat each other we learned in kindergarten.
Yeah, I think we can go with those basic fundamentals that we learned when we're little kids and really apply them now to especially the landscape we're dealing with now. There are so many differences, and yet it all gets back to those foundational principles. For example, empathy. Little kids they're very egocentric. They don't want to share. They don't want to consider someone else's point of view from their vantage point, from the idea of imagining yourself walking in someone else's shoes to understand their perspective. And yet that's so critical as we want to continue to develop intimacy, stay closely connected to those who we care about, even in these very divisive times.
Right. And I love that you said empathy because EQ, emotional intelligence, is just such a hot term and has been for about the last decade. But really, these last few years, employers are judging and giving raises or not, promotions or not, based on an employee's EQ. So empathy, very, very key. So we're today going to talk about not only romantic relationships, friendships, family connections. So your foundational principles really apply to all. One that you've taught me is think about the common values. And I think this goes even in business connections from a brand to its customers.
Right. All of this applies to this connection that we feel certainly in business, certainly in social relationships, personal relationships. We have an affinity for someone, and sometimes we can't pinpoint why, but it's usually because we see in them something that we see in ourselves, that we share these common core values. And what's tough is when we feel that we start noticing that, wait a minute, I thought we shared that common ground. I thought we aligned on that very important part of my identity, for example, or the way that I see the world, my worldview. And when we notice that a friend is in a different direction or moving in a different direction, it's very troubling because we go, wait a minute, are they changing? Did they reveal something I didn't know about them? Have we lost that common ground, which is so fundamental for why we even became friends in the first place? And as you mentioned with business relationships, when we're looking at values like integrity, ethics, honesty in business relationships, sometimes that's going to be an indication that you need to part ways because, of course, your business interacting with another business, there's an implicit understanding that we align on these values. And certainly when you're dealing with customers, you want to make sure that you are being represented in these other business relationships you have in a way that's honestly reflecting who you are as a company and your mission statement and your values.
Right. And we've seen in our current climate that customers will turn away from certain brands if a brand chooses to go deep and announce what its values are, whether it's an endorsement of a political candidate or a certain cause that's out there. All right. So for the third biggie of our fundamental principles here, the R word that we should all live with, and that is respect.
Yeah, and respect is tough because, again, if you do sense that someone that you care about is making statements or moving in a direction that is not aligned with your values, getting back to values, you do start to see them differently. Can you still respect them? And what I encourage us all and invite us all to consider is that if someone takes a position that you don't understand, you talked about brands making a statement and then people going, well, I'm not going to support that brand anymore. The same is true that we have in this current landscape, which is a little bit different than when we were coming up, Roshini. In the day, there were media outlets. There were ABC, NBC, PBS. There were only a handful. And we all, as a community, tended to trust those sources. And we're seeing a very different landscape in the media now. Independent media is thriving. And some people might say, well, I still trust those bigger legacy media outlets. And other people are saying, I don't trust them anymore. So I'm getting information over here. So we could have two people who love each other, have been friends for 25 years, share those common values, have that mutual respect, but now they're getting different information that is so different. It's very hard for them to see eye to eye anymore. And they might even share that same core value, but see it manifested in the rhetoric they're hearing from these different outlets in a different way. And that can really cause confusion and dissension.
Yeah, it really does. So let's talk about when dissension, confusion happens. This could be, let's say, in a friendship. So you've had this friend for 20 years or more, and who knows what the reason is, but you're seeing that values are starting to come a little unhinged. You're just not aligning like you used to.
Right.
What do you do, Dr. Karin? What do you do in that situation?
Well, it's a time for reflection because there's a tension here. There's the part of you that says, I'm loyal. We have gone through all these times together. This friend probably was there for you during some crises of some sort that you speak to all the time. And you want to honor that loyalty. And again, that respect comes in. And again, you probably at one point had those common values. But at the same time, you have to be true to yourself and they have to be true to themselves. So this is a time to reflect. Is this a lifelong friendship? Is this friendship meant to go the distance? And that can be very difficult I know for women in particular, we are raised and socialized to be nurturing and caring and loyal. I'm not saying men aren't, but there's differences in the ways that men and women are raised, boys and girls. And so it can be hard for us to think, what if this friendship really is just for a season? It was for a season and it is time to part ways because I don't want to get into fights all the time. I don't want to try to badger this person to be someone that I think that they should be when they clearly are evolving into someone that they are designed to be, perhaps someone that's not meant to be in my life at this point. That can be very painful if you reflect and assess and decide that that's where this relationship needs to go. You're going to need to grieve that. There's going to be a big loss there. Again, you might start to doubt yourself, your own loyalty. And at the same time, on the other hand, if you reflect and realize, no, I do want to maintain this friendship. There is so much good there. There's still so much that we can say. Then I would invite everyone involved to consider having open conversations in a very neutral as possible environment, meaning let's just talk. Not trying to convince each other of our positions on some of these issues that seems like we're going in different directions, but just express again, getting back to that empathy. Let me hear from your perspective. I'll share, and then we'll order the appetizer. We don't even need to it's not time to badger it out and badger one another. It's just time to just listen.
Listening is so key. Do you recommend, in the work that you've done with your patients, that maybe they do get to that place with a friend or a family member? So I'm not really talking about romantic relationships at this point, because obviously I think you would recommend if it's an unhealthy romantic relationship, get out. But in those situations where you've had longer term history with someone, it's not that easy to avoid them at Thanksgiving.
Right.
Can you get to a place where either on your own or mutually agree that there will just be some topics you won't get into in order to keep the love alive or the friendship intact?
Right. I mean, you make a very good point. With friendships that are outside of our family, we have a choice involved. And certainly with romantic relationships, we have a choice. With family, sometimes we just know Uncle Frank's going to do what Uncle Frank does. He's going to say what he says. And yeah, do you really want it to escalate to the point that we have half the family leaving before turkey is served this Thanksgiving? I don't think we want that. So I think it is important to, and again, that level of respect. Like, can I love someone and not agree with everything that they are about? Yeah, we can. It's harder. It's much easier when we go like, I agree. You're right. I'm right. Yay. But if we can have that, again, the broader value kicks in then. What's my value? Did I have to say everything that's on my mind this Thanksgiving, this Christmas? Or can I go, the bigger value is that we break bread together, that we reminisce over old times, that we honor those who in our family who've gone on to heaven. Like, can we have something that is about family and love and connection and put some of these divisive issues to the side for this meal, at least, please.
Yeah, at least in that moment, whether it's a holiday meal, birthday meal, anniversary, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question for you. In your work and research, have you ever found that there are certain personality types that can let go of things more easily than other personality types?
Yeah, we're all wired differently. And there are certainly, you can get into diagnoses of different personality types and personality disorders, and those can be very challenging people, for example, narcissists in general. Although, Roshini, as a psychologist, I do see that a lot of folks are throwing around diagnoses that it can become just kind of it gets into our vernacular. Right. Yes, for sure. It can be, oh, he's a narcissist, and then writing that person off. Was he diagnosed as a narcissist? So that can get a little murky. The waters can get a little unclear. But I do think we obviously need to look at personality type, temperament, and we make adjustments therein. And I'm not saying you change who you are or change who you believe, but also, what's the point of beating your head against the wall, trying to have conversations with someone who is never going to be open, like we talked about a few minutes ago, to having these very loving, nurturing, open, listening conversations. And certainly if that's someone in your family, that's someone that you just need to consider who they are, who they're bringing to the table, the skill sets that they have available, and let's stay grounded in reality so that we aren't disappointed and frustrated the entire time.
Well, Dr. Karin, we can't let you go without asking about romantic relationships. So maybe some of our crisis filers are figuring out, is now the time to pop the question, or do I need to walk away from more of a love relationship for my own health? What are some tips right now to guide them? Because this is an emotional decision that they're making.
Yeah. And Roshini, the research shows that getting back to these core values we've been talking about throughout the entire conversation, they are fundamental for romantic relationships. Sometimes people don't want to talk about that. They want to stay in the heady, the romance, the stars in their eyes. That's wonderful. That's an important part of the romantic journey. But as you start thinking about, like you said, getting more serious, is this going to be my person for life? All the research shows that the more we have in common, marital therapists call it money in the bank. It's just, there are fewer things for us to fight about. In the way we do life, and sometimes we don't think about how do we do life, but even things as simple but actually profound as whether your partner is an extrovert and you're more of an introvert. If your husband comes home and like, hey, it's Thursday. Hey, tomorrow I ran into the Smiths. Tomorrow night we're going to go get dinner with them. And you're an introvert and you're like, excuse me, you didn't check with me. And that can be something that can, after time and time again, can really wear on the connection and the fabric of a relationship. So we want to think about who we are. The better we know ourselves, the better we know what will work in partnership. And don't minimize that, because sometimes we want to minimize because we're feeling all the feels and I just want this relationship so badly. But if I'm minimizing who I am, once the shine wears off a little bit and we're in the trenches of day-to-day living, we will start to resent that our partner's different. And we really can't blame anyone if they showed themselves they showed us who they are, and we decide to ignore that for the feels and for the love. We also need to be very mindful. I've heard it put this way: follow your heart, but take your head with you. So be wise, be aware, and don't make compromises that in a couple of years you could really be frustrated with and resent your partner, and also be frustrated with yourself.
Yeah, and also you're the only you've got. Yeah. And life, barring some tragic accidents, which do happen, and illnesses, life is actually pretty long. Yeah. So it's not, you take that time to make those decisions. You don't have to make split second, or even, you can take more than a week if you need to, or longer, to make some of these decisions. And of course, as always, remember Dr. Karin's advice. So thank you so much, as always, for your great takes. I love it when you say the feels, because it's so true. The feels are important. You got the feels for someone, but that's not what's going to sustain everything every time. Get more Dr. Karin on her Love and Life podcast. Connect with her directly at loveandlifemedia.com. Today's Crisis Brief is brought to you by Huntington. Number 1, remember these foundational principles for any relationship: empathy, common values, respect. Number 2, be aware of echo chambers. social media, and other sources that try to ignore these foundational principles. Number 3, as you reflect on the state of any relationship and decide to walk away, give yourself time to grieve. Sometimes reaching your goals takes more than money. It takes know-how. That's why money's just the start of what Huntington can do. Get more than money from your bank. See how at huntington.com/getmore. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Check out our website, thecrisisfiles.com, to catch up on all case files and to send us ideas for new ones. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.